We also have an interview later on today with Travis Smith. You will like this interview. You know, I do nothing but pick on comic book movies. Travis Smith is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Concordia University. He has written a book about what superheroes can teach us about ethics and about our country. And the way he did the book is really clever. He paired off, you know how when you were a little kid, ladies, I'm not talking to you because you're far more intelligent and have better things to do. But guys sit around before they discover they're girls. Guys sit around and they say, you know, what would happen if Spider-Man fought with Batman? Do girls even know that guys do this? I mean, or do they care? You know, it's like, that's what we were doing while you were studying like physics, ladies. But he uses those little battles to explain his point. It's a very entertaining interview. Travis Smith is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Concordia University and the author of the new book, Superhero Ethics, which attempts to answer the question, can superheroes be good role models of ethical behavior and personal responsibility for a free society? Very fun interview. Stay tuned. Travis Smith, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, Andrew.
Now, you're coming into a slightly hostile environment. I have talked a lot about how it's not that I dislike any one superhero movie. There are just so many of them. It seems like they're kind of sucking up the culture. But you have had your relationship with comic books goes back a long way. So let's start with that. How did you get interested in comics in the first place?
Oh, boy. Do you want me to name the particular friends and relatives that I blame for getting me into this expensive hobby?
No, a simple description of the comics themselves. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I enjoyed these kinds of stories as a kid, Saturday morning cartoons. And then when I discovered them as a preteen, I got hooked, and eventually it becomes a habit.
And one of my cranky complaints is that I feel like I was a collector of comic books. I loved them as a kid, but I do feel that you should leave things behind, leave some of these things behind. But you actually feel this has something to say, that comics in general have something to say. Is that fair?
Yeah, I've tried to make the case in superhero ethics that it's worthwhile to critically examine the kinds of characters that culture puts forward as heroic. You know, these are characters that are advanced within our culture as if they are to be admirable, as if they are to be perhaps imitated and praiseworthy. And so, of course, it's an important exercise for us. We're going to engage in some introspection regarding our culture to take a look at those kinds of models, those kinds of examples. Ask, are they good role models? Should they, in fact, be the kinds of people that we look up to or aspire to be ourselves?
It's a perfectly good point. They wouldn't be this popular if they weren't feeding some kind of emotional need in people. One of the things that I really enjoy about superhero ethics is that you pose a lot of your points as kind of battles between two superheroes. And I remember as a kid, all these long, what Stephen King called the conversations you have before you discover there are girls, about which superhero would win a fight. So let me take you through some of these superhero fights, and you can explain to me what it is that you think they say. You start out
Happy to do so.
Okay, you start out with the Hulk versus Wolverine as two beastly superheroes. What do we learn from that?
Right. Well, Wolverine famously first appears in an issue of the Hulk. And so they pair up well, just as a matter of historical fact. Of course, it's the case that you'll probably remember that it's commonplace in the stories that the superheroes clash and fight a bit before they realize that they've got to team up together and fight the bad guy. And so I took advantage of the fact that heroes often fight heroes and not just the villains in order to frame the book. And so I start off with characters that are beastly and move toward characters that are divine. So I started off with Wolverine and Hulk. Hulk is famous for being angry, right? And Wolverine says that he's the best there is at what he does, and what he does isn't very nice. and so I put them together to say, what do these kinds of people represent about what our society is like, or what is lacking in our society, and actually contrast them in that way. I talk about how the Hulk kind of represents a sort of extreme of individualism. Hulk isn't just always wanting to prove that he's the strongest there is, that he always wants to be left alone. And so he represents the kind of idea that some people have, that if only they were just left alone, right? If only nobody meddled in my business and I was just totally free to do whatever I wanted, then I'd be happy. I would succeed at everything I'd want. And you get angry when people get in your way, and you get really angry when people tell you that who you are and what you're trying to do isn't that great, and you become resolved to demonstrate your greatness against that. And the Hulk speaks to that impulse, that I think that to the degree to which modern liberal society has this individualistic quality to it, that aspect of the Hulk is familiar to us. Wolverine, on the other hand, I say represents something that's lacking in our society, something that modern society as a whole was intentionally designed to suppress and downplay, which are considerations of honor, at least as they're understood in pre-modern societies, in which codes of honor governed behavior to a greater degree than they do in, say, free society, modern society. And they present a rival standard of right and good other than universal morality or piety or just the law. And so Wolverine aspires to be an honorable person. Being honorable, concerned with intangible goods like honor, is something that animals can't do. It's something that's distinctively human. So you have Wolverine, who's a very animalistic character, who's always striving to prove his humanity, and is aware that in order to prove his humanity, he has to behave honorably. That's a distinctively human thing to do, and he finds himself at odds with a modern society that tends to disregard and poo-poo considerations of honor, and so he doesn't find himself at home in modern society. But nevertheless, considerations of honor, as much as a society like modern society can tend to suppress them and disregard them, they never go away. It's a part of the human condition that we're stuck with, and we kind of see the way in which perverse codes of honor come to the forefront, even in a society in which we pretend that we're not going to, have a feud, to fight each other over some slight. But that is almost exactly what we do now, except for we do it on social media and on the internet. And we shame people and try to destroy people's lives on the basis of being able to claim that they've said something dishonorable or they've behaved shamefully. And so I talk about how Wolverine's represents also the desire to protect his tribe, the mutants. And he gets extremely angry when anybody from his tribe is threatened. And we see that all over social media as well, the way in which people get in a furor and outrage whenever they perceive that somebody who they regard as belonging to their tribe is under some sort of threat. And the degree of rage and fury that we see in Wolverine, we see unleashed across the internet on a daily basis nowadays.
It's interesting. One of my favorite of the superhero movies, Logan, Wolverine is kind of compared to Shane from the old Westerns, and his ethos is shown as kind of an old-fashioned honor ethos. He is a very interesting character. Another matchup. Sorry.
Movie. I was going to say Logan's a fantastic movie, and I see that movie as depicting him as a kind of Moses character. It's a sort of secularization of Exodus, in which Wolverine discovers that the young lost members of his own tribe are enslaved in a foreign land, and he has to go and rescue them and try to bring them to another promised land. Some Eden happens to be Canada.
I know, it was kind of a letdown, but yeah.
Which, of course, he dies before he gets there and helps them find their way to some paradise. So these kinds of movies, as much as we often suspect them of just being mere juvenile amusement, they have staying power because they are drawing upon a lot of the resources on which modern Western society is built, whether classical or biblical, and I try to bring these out in my book.
Yeah, that's certainly, I have to say that Logan was certainly an intelligent movie with a lot of underpinnings. The next battle that I really liked in superhero ethics is the battle of Green Lantern versus Iron Man as a battle between two representations of the imaginative man, the imagination. Can you explain that?
I sure can, Andrew. Iron Man represents our hopes that technology will fix everything and save us. And I like to draw, for a point of cultural comparison, when I was a child, the Star Wars movies came out. I grew up on Star Wars. And in 1977, Obi-Wan Kenobi told Luke Skywalker that Darth Vader was more machine than man now, twisted and evil. In 1977, we didn't need to be told that that meant he was twisted and evil. We understood more machine than man now. That's not good, right? And then even in the 90s, when Star Trek had the Borg get introduced, these half man machine hybrid aliens that are going to assimilate humanity. We know they're the bad guys on sight. Tony Stark, however, aspires to be a man-machine hybrid. In fact, he's someone who, is increasingly becoming more machine than man. And nowadays, in the early 21st century, we watch his character, and he's become so beloved. We envy him. We wish that we too had his powers. We can see how this hope, this expectation that technology should fix everything and save us all is made manifest in this extremely popular character that Robert Downey Jr. has done an amazing job at making so lovable. And yet it's disturbing the degree to which, I mean, in the Infinity War movie that recently came out, Spider-Man dies. I put scare quotes around that, dies.
Yeah.
We know he'll be fine, I'm sure. But he dies praying to Tony Stark to save him. And Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is one of the most moral characters among all superheroes. He should not be praying to Tony Stark to save him. Green Lantern, I liken to the tendency of people to believe that if only we had enough imagination, enough willpower, enough resolve, and the means at our disposal, we could reshape the world, right? A sort of revolutionary impulse that some people have, that we could fix everything. And the only thing that's lacking is enough imagination. People say, you've probably heard this quote, another world is possible, right?
Sure.
And Green Lantern speaks to that feeling that especially maybe the adolescent reader might well have as well, to expect, the world's wrong, right? And I can imagine how it should be, what it ought to be, and why don't we just fix it, right? All it takes is get on board with the program, and we can make the world it ought to be, and not this flawed world that our parents and ancestors have handed down to us. How did they not realize that it should have been, made right by now? And so Green Lantern speaks to that impulse as well.
Do you think that there is something in the idea? I sometimes see how many of these films there are and how popular they are. And I wonder if humanity is sort of preparing itself for a Tony Stark universe. If humanity is sort of saying, we're one generation from a world in which we're going to be entering things into our brains through technical means that are going to make us supermen in some ways. And this is an imaginative way of getting ready for that. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah. In my research as a political scientist, I've read the works of thinkers like Francis Bacon and René Descartes from 400 years ago. And you read them, and as far as I can tell, they'd already figured all of this out 400 years ago. They just knew it would take an awful long time for us to get to the point in which the technology, the science, would be able to do the things that they envisioned to transform the human condition. But I don't want to put some sort of causality to some sort of force that's out there moving us and compelling us toward some evolution or something. But these characters speak to us because they get to the heart of our deepest commitments in some ways. And so the fact that, and I think the way Iron Man is torn in some ways between his brilliance and his ability to produce the machines that are going to make possible these transformations. And at the same time, he's troubled by them and he holds back. He doesn't pursue them to their furthermost conclusions in terms of, he doesn't just impose on all humanity such technologies that would save us from ever needing to be saved again. Instead, he just flies around and comes to the rescue of a few people here and there now and then. Why doesn't he try to bring about the singularity as people talk about today? Why doesn't he do that? On the other hand, you see that he's an alcoholic and a womanizer, someone who is very indulgent with respect to pleasures. And I think that that's sort of indicative of the fact that he's shutting down part of his brain. He wants to forget that the furthermost conclusions of his own science aren't simply that we could transform ourselves, but that in a certain sense, we're not worthy of it because from the technological perspective that he represents, our lives, including his own, which he's so proud of, are actually insignificant. And he's troubled by that. In the last movie, The Infinity War, the villain says specifically to Iron Man that he's not the only one that is cursed with knowledge. And I think that's one nihilist speaking to another nihilist about those kinds of conclusions.
I have to ask you to keep this short because I'm running out of time, but I do want to give you a chance.
Sure, you
to
got
just,
me all excited. You're talking,
no, that's absolutely.
Go on and on and on.
But I want to ask you about your divine conflict between Thor and Superman. I have to ask you to keep it to about a minute. What do you see coming out of that?
Right. There's a sort of a messiah-like quality to all superheroes, and some of them even more so than others. And I talked about how it's not that Superman would want to rule the world. The concern is that some people might want someone like a Superman to come about to rule us for our own good. And I talk about the way in which, as much as we pride ourselves on being free people, there still is in a lot of people this desire to have some super person come to the rescue and save them and absolve them of responsibility for themselves and fix everything for them. And so Superman, I think, in some ways represents this temptation, but also because he's, one of the great American superheroes, he himself resists this and instead treats people with respects people's equality, respects people's freedom, and wants to be an inspiration to people to help them take responsibility for themselves rather than to assume responsibility over them for their own good.
Mm-hmm. Well, Travis Smith, your book is Superhero Ethics. I have to say you have made many people here at the Daily Wire happy. They're tired of hearing me attack these films. You gave them a very good argument for reason for being. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. It's an entertaining interview. I really enjoy that guy.